All right. Jennifer, can you hear us?
Yes, it can.
Thank you. Okay, time is 1:30. So I'll call the June 24th special STRGBA GSA meeting to order. We have a quorum. So going around the room here. Far end over there, we've got Mike Pitcock from City of Waterford. Next to him, Jeff Roberts, City of Oakdale. We got Darren Smallin from the City of Riverbank. Christy McKinnon, Stanislaus County. Jesse Franco to my left from MID. I am from OID. I'm Eric Thorburn. And next to me on my right is Timothy Barahona from City Modesto. Let's jump right into things. Business from the public. At this time, interested persons are welcome to introduce any topic within the agency's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the agency at this meeting. It's not required, but speakers may provide their name and address. Public comments will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker. This is for items that are not on the agenda. Seeing none in the room, no hands raised on the phone. We will move on to item number 3. The May 13th, 2026 GSA meeting minutes. Assuming everyone's had a chance to review those minutes, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Darren, thank you. We'll go out to the public for public comment on the May 13th meeting minutes. Seeing none in the room, none on the phone. Public comment on the minutes? Okay. Any final comments on the minutes from the member agencies? No? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous, thank you. All right. Item number 4. There we go, Dominic on the phone. Item number 4 is the 2025 periodic evaluation and 5-year GSP update. This is a C2V SIM historical conditions and baseline model updates presentation. Dominic from Woodard and Curran is going to lead this discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Eric. Just give me one moment to get this up on the screen. We can get started. Please let me know. Can you see me? Okay. Okay, cool. Well, yep. Thank you, everyone. So as Eric said, we are kind of in the midst of updating our periodic evaluation and 5-year update for the GSP. Part of that process involves updating and refining the C2V SIM model that simulates a lot of our aquifer conditions as well as our land surface processes and standard operations within the subbasin. As part of this process, what I have up on my screen right now is a little bit of the roadmap. So kind of before we get started, I wanted to at least let you know kind of where we're going and what the plan is. And so today we're going to hit the first 2 bullets, and kind of you can see in the green and in the brown. Our goal here is to talk to you about some of the refinements that we're making to the model, try to utilize the best available data, and then how we're going to take that information, project our future conditions, take a look at what we anticipate the basin will look like under no significant management changes, and see what the basin can look like over the next 50+ years. So that's going to be our set for our goal for today. Then in future GSA meetings, 2 major items that we have to address as part of the periodic evaluation is to look at interconnected surface waters, look at the stream system that borders the subbasin, as well as look from a management perspective and a policy perspective to take a look at the overall efficacy and impacts that we can make when it comes to our projects and management actions and how we can achieve our our long-term sustainability in the Modesto subbasin. So kind of starting with that, I'm going to kind of dive right into some of the historical model updates. And kind of similar to the previous slide, I just want to kind of, before we dive into some of the details and into some of the data, I want to at least kind of give you an idea of where we're going. And so as part of this effort, we were scoped to refine the model in kind of three primary ways. One was to take a look at riparian diversions, principally to incorporate the dry creek riparian, as well as to take a look at the best available, publicly available information that we have from the state of California, to take a look at the state board's Cal Waters database and refine the model with the latest and greatest in that regard. In addition to that, we also know that both MID and OID have released their 2025 agricultural water management plans. With the release of those two reports, we gain a lot of information on the operations of the basin. We'll look at a variety of dynamics, looking at things like surface water operations, groundwater supplies, overall demand, things to that effect. And our goal is to be able to look at those reports as data points and to be able to kind of update and refine the model to make sure that we capture the land surface operations, because as we all know, those greatly affect our aquifer conditions. And then finally, as part of the interconnected surface water analysis that has been mandated by DWR, we want to make sure that the model is in a good place, that it's well calibrated, that we have a good representation of the stream system. And so we took a little bit of a deep dive looking at the stream aquifer connection, the dynamics associated with that, and made a few minor updates to the model to better reflect those conditions. All right, so now getting into the data itself. The first thing I want to take a look at is some of the riparian surface water supplies that we have within the basin. And so for those of you who have been participating over the past several months, one of the things that you'll notice is that we have updated the model to include and incorporate diversions off the Dry Creek system. And so in addition to that process, which was already completed as part of the annual report cycle several months ago, we also now wanted to make a look and see if we can refine the model to use higher resolution data. And so just kind of for a little bit of background, you can kind of see in your top left here, one of the things that we did is at the time, when we had developed the model initially, we utilized a data set developed by the Department of Water Resources to estimate riparian water diversions, but based on their historical rights, right? So that's what folks have the ability to divert water from, rather than what they have actually diverted water from. And so at the time, that was the best available information that we had. But this past fall, I believe November of 2025, the California State Water Resources Control Board released and kind of finalized the Cal Waters platform. And what that database does, as you kind of see here on the right-hand side, is that not only does it provide much higher resolution data, we can see the diversion location, place of use, and a full monthly time series on how much water has been diverted off of each of the stream systems within the Modesto subbasin. And so one of our major efforts was to utilize the newly available data and to refine our model with the latest and greatest. So you may be asking yourself, well, what kind of an impact did that make? So first of all, as I said a second ago, it improved the resolution of the data overall. But in addition to that, one of the things that we can do is utilize the new database to understand the historical diversions, right? So these are data sets that are provided by growers, landowners, diverters themselves. This is what they report to the California State Board in conjunction with their water rights. And so what we're able to do is be able to basically download that publicly available data and to understand, rather than estimating based on historical rights, to be able to utilize directly what their actual diversions are. And so what that means is that we can take that data and incorporate that into the model. Now, there is a limitation with the Cal Waters database, and principally that it only includes data post 2014. And so that's what you can kind of see here on the left-hand side. Well, and And so and any of those have been involved over the past many years, you know that the historical C2V sim model that historical model runs from 1991 through 2025. And so in order to utilize this database, what effectively we're doing is we're only replacing the data post 2014 when we feel that there is a good quality of data available in Cal Waters. We're replacing that last decade or so with the data from this database, while leaving the historical data alone, everything that's before 2014. So for perspective, though, I did also want to provide some of the kind of the estimate of numbers you can kind of see here on this slide to show how this may impact our representation of the basin overall. Again, we do believe that this is better high resolution quality information, but is going to be different, and we understand why and how that's different. And so, but one of the things you can kind of see here is that overall, as looking at these long-term trends, what we see is that the Cal Waters database that we have now is slightly lower diversions comparatively to what DWR had provided in the past. And so we do anticipate some water budget impacts based on that. So then the next step we have is to take a look at the agricultural water management plans. Again, this is really a check to you just kind of evaluate how does our model compare to real world operations on the ground. When we developed this model, we had used previous management plans to really understand the land surface dynamics, to estimate and to evaluate this wide variety of lists of water budget components you can kind of see here on the left. But we also know that as time passes, some of that data can be refined, operations can be improved, irrigation management, land management changes over time, right? And so an agricultural water management plan is updated every 5 years. And so when we originally developed the GSP, we leveraged the 2015 and 2020 ag management plans, but now that the 2025 is available, we wanted to make sure that the model is still consistent with what the more detailed reports, the higher resolution reports that are available from each of the districts. So one of the things that we did is we went through their detailed water budgets, looked at each of these components, everything from overall crop land use, demand, how that demand is then met as a combination of surface water and groundwater supply, looked at the conveyance losses, both when it comes to seepage, operational spills. We make sure we want to understand all of that. But the last one, and the one I want to principally draw your attention to here, is the irrigation efficiency. This is a big, often a question mark when it comes to a lot of modeling. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to field scale or farm level efficiency with the water use. It's very hard to measure at a regional scale, but we are very fortunate and able to utilize these plans to estimate what that looks like. And so what you can kind of see here now as we dive is, in this area, there are 2 irrigation districts, and what we have is the data sets to look at the agricultural water management plans and the data points that they provide. And representing in the blue. So one of the things you'll notice here with Modesto Irrigation District is that their ag management plan uses a representative water year. So there's only 3 specific data points for those representative years. On the other hand, OID, they provide water budgets for kind of at a continuous annual basis. And so there's slightly different levels of information available, but we do still want to make sure we go through this, take a validation point, make sure that our model is following those trends fairly consistently. And so one of the things that we did is just compare the model with the 2 irrigation districts. And so one of the things that you can certainly see here represented in orange is how that compares to the blue dots, the blue lines, as published by their ag management plans. And what you can see is that they are fairly consistent, though in the past few years, again, the distance from that 2020 to 2025 period, we did have to make a couple light adjustments to make sure that the model continues to trend with their operations. Now, certainly we don't want to make sure we don't, ignore some of the non-district areas. We definitely understand that while the level of data available from the 2 districts is significantly more, we want to be able to take what we've learned from those management plans, understand the operations, and then transfer that information to some of the non-district areas to make sure that we're representing those areas to the best of our ability as well. So one of the things you can see here overall, if we kind of look at our full 35 plus year simulation period is one of the things that we know by tracking those ag management plans, by tracking the data with the model, is that in general, irrigation efficiency has a tendency to trend upward across the basin over time. I don't think it will come to a surprise to anyone that, with the prevalence of permanent crops, scarcity of water, we want to make sure that we are as efficient with that water use as possible. And so with the continued adaptation, the continued adoption of pressurized systems, of people acknowledging and trying to improve their irrigation management, that we see irrigation efficiency improve over time. And so as we extrapolate those district areas to non-district areas, kind of draw your attention to the dotted lines here. They're dotted simply because there's a lot more uncertainty with those operations. But what you can kind of see here, representing the non-district west in this green dotted line, and the non-district east represented in the blue dotted line, is a kind of a transfer of that data. Now, there's a lot of variety and uncertainty. There's soil conditions, there's the cropping mixes. But principally, one of the biggest differences you can see between the two of these, and one of the reasons why you'll notice the variance between the non-district east and the non-district west ultimately becomes to their water supply. And that is really kind of reflected of how operations, the prevalence of drip in one side, while certainly both are utilizing those pressurized systems, we do know that there's more flood irrigation and surface water usage in the non-district west. I apologize. The non-district west, and that's why you'll see that their estimate for irrigation efficiency
We'll take questions at the end.
is about 65%.
Yep, that's as big as I can make it. I might be able to move this. Hold on, Dominic.
Of course.
I'm not sure I can, guys. I think that's as big as I can make it. Go ahead, Dominic. We'll keep going. I'll see what I can do here.
Okay. So, but one of the main things that I really want to kind of focus in on is, at least once we get to kind of these past 10 years, what you'll notice is that most of the sub-basin, their irrigation efficiency average is about 60 to about lower 70%, 72, 73, 74%, depending on the area, depending on the localized conditions and the irrigation management that we see across the sub-basin. Okay, so as far as that's really updates a lot of the operational data, then the next step is to ask ourselves, okay, well, what does the model say with as far regards to the annual reports? How did that change the overall dynamics within the system? So principally, one of the main things that you can kind of see here, when it looks at our land and water use budget, there's really two major components. One, you'll notice that the agricultural demand, it is reduced slightly. That's due to the increase in irrigation efficiency that we applied. And so you'll notice, particularly in this kind of middle, the 2010 forward period, you'll notice that we have a little bit of additional reductions in our overall agricultural demand due to increased estimates of irrigation efficiency. But in addition to that, you'll also notice, you'll also notice that kind of towards the tail end of the simulation period, to be in line with some of those riparian water diversions, you'll notice that our surface water supply has been slightly reduced. Again, these are not major impacts. You can see here, they're fairly consistent in the long term, but I do want to make sure that we at least identify that those changes do have impacts to our overall water budget, and they will continue to have it as we kind of get and build that groundwater budget and the understanding of the aquifer. Okay. And so, as you would imagine, the land and the water use budget also affects our operational water budget, because the operational water budget, and again, is representative of a combination of really what happens vertically in the groundwater system. It's what we have the greatest direct control over. And so particularly, you'll notice here that similar to the previous slide, we see reduced groundwater pumping due to that irrigation efficiency. The increased irrigation efficiency and reduced overall demand. But with efficiency comes less deep percolation. And so you can kind of see those offsetting each other, and they do offset each other fairly consistently. That efficiency is a double-edged sword in that regard. And so in addition, that really hard to tell here, but there's a slight reduction in our canal and reservoir recharge. Again, that's simply a ratio or relationship that between the amount diverted and the amount. And so when we change the surface water supply, that number does change a little bit. And so when we look at, kind of continue to build that, and we look at the operational water budget summarized and in kind of a net value, looking at the net recharge, you can kind of see that in general, it's still fairly consistent. Again, principally because when we look at irrigation efficiency, it offsets deep percolation with pumping almost 1-to-1, but we do have a slight reduction in surface water supply. So because of that, we are going to see a little bit of a net extraction or a negative net recharge when we look at the water budget overall, principally in those last few years where we updated to the Cal Waters database. Okay, so then the last major update we have to the historical model, and last step that we wanted to take was to make sure that we are ready and prepared to evaluate interconnected surface waters. Now, the reason why we need to make sure that the model is well suited for this and that we are able to have, to simulate interconnect surface waters well is due to some feedback we received from DWR when we published the last GSP. And so every time that the subbasin submits a GSP, DWR reviews that GSP, provides a combination of what they call corrective actions. And really what these are is these are kind of mandates, suggestions from the state that basically say, hey, there are areas where you have, done really well in evaluating, and then there's areas that we need to work on a little bit more. And so one of those areas that we could, that DWR is requesting for us to put a little bit of additional effort into is what we call corrective action number 5, which is effectively to the second bullet here, is we must use the model to estimate the location, quantity, and timing of stream depletions. So effectively, though, what that means is that whenever we when we pump groundwater and have a tendency for water levels to decline in this basin, when water levels decline, it induces additional stream depletions from the between the stream and the aquifer system. I do want to add the caveat here that the first bullet is that DWR is anticipated, but they have not yet released their guidance documentation, which goes into great detail or is expected to go into great detail as to how they want these stream depletions estimated. Still, we do know they have released 3 white papers that kind of give us an ability to anticipate what will be in those guidance documents, but because their formal guidance is not yet available, we're going to take our best available approach, which is going to be based on their DWR white papers. And so in anticipation for that, or preparation for that analysis, one of the major things that we want to do with this process is we want to make sure that we can validate the model. We want to be able to look at the historical conditions, assess the model's calibration, and if needed, refine some of the potential stream or aquifer parameters using the best available data that we have, right? Basically, when we want to make sure that we simulate the model, that we simulate the stream system the best way we can so that we can provide an accurate result. Okay, so really then, so what does that mean? So for the first step that we did, we took a look at model validation. And so one of the things that I really want to kind of draw your kind of attention to is kind of some of these 2 graphs here on the right. And so one of the things that, at least kind of for reference, is that when we originally developed the model and what the GSP is based on, the calibration of the model represented 1981 through 2015. That's because we were working on the model in that time period, and that's kind of the best available information that we had at the time. And one of the things that you'll kind of notice here by looking at these water budgets is that pre-2015, right, between the stresses, or sorry, pre-2015, before a lot of the stresses that were induced by one of the latest drought, the stream system within the Modesto subbasin was predominantly a gaining stream. And what that means is that water traditionally flowed from the aquifer to the stream system. Post 2015, what we've noticed is that we're actually seeing the reverse of those dynamics. And so because of that, we can kind of see here is that water has traditionally moved on a net basis. Water has moved from the stream system to the groundwater system. Now, there's a lot of detail into the specific spatial and temporal dynamics with that. But in general, if we want to take a broad stroke and kind of to characterize the stream system, this water budget kind of is an initial view of that. And so one of the things that we really acknowledged when looking at this was that, well, the conditions today are not perfectly reflected in the calibration. And by what I mean by that is that traditionally we moved from being the groundwater system would be a kind of gaining water from the stream system historically pre-2015, and then post-2015 we're actually we have a losing stream system. And so we wanted to make sure that we are able to kind of extend that calibration period and really understand some of the dynamics beyond that. In addition to that, one of the things you can notice is that we looked at several of the stream, the stream and groundwater level hydrographs adjacent to the river system, and we wanted to take a look at their calibration. So you can kind of see that same relationship represented here on this hydrograph. As an example, I'll have several more in a minute, but as an example for this slide, we're looking at OID3. And one of the things you can kind of see, again, that vertical line shows when the calibration was beforehand. And before the calibration, we were, during the calibration period before 2015, we were tracking groundwater levels fairly well. But beyond that, you can kind of notice here that groundwater levels had a tendency to decline and comparatively to the model simulation. And so we look for potential ways to improve that correlation. So what do we do? And so one of the things you'll see here kind of on this lower section here is what are some of the model refinements that we make. And so ultimately, though, what we did is we looked at two main things. We looked at the stream wetted perimeter, looked at the stream rate rating tables, and then we evaluated that comparatively and looked at the stream bed conductivity in line with aquifer parameters and kind of did analysis comparing all of those. Effectively, though, what we did is specifically for wetted perimeter, we looked at a lot of years. We looked at GIS spatial imagery. We looked at a lot of years to see what is the kind of both the width, compare that to a rating table to estimate the stream stage, the depth of the stream, to estimate a value for the wetted perimeter. And then in addition to that, we looked at what is the USGS texture model. We looked at several local wells to better understand the parameterization of the model around the stream system. And ultimately, though, what we did is kind of looking at the combination of these two, we reduced the overall conductance of the stream. And so for what that effectively means is that it is the flow between the stream and the groundwater system is a little bit more impaired comparatively to the previous iteration of the model. And so what you kind of see here, and maybe I'll kind of switch back and forth between the figures here, is that overall you'll see a little bit less stream aquifer interaction, particularly in these past couple of years. As we look at kind of this bright blue color is the previous iteration of the model. And you'll notice it is reduced slightly in the latest iteration, right? So that's effectively an improvement to the refinement. We provided that additional data, looked again at the best available information that we have access to, incorporated that on a model, and we see this impact. Then we're looking at that hydrograph, again, the same one that we looked at before, where now I actually have two lines here. I know it's very hard to see, so I apologize for that for anyone who's having a difficulty seeing my slide. But what you can see here is that there are two individual hydrographs. And so what you'll see in the dark blue color is the updated version comparatively to the previous model in the gray. And what you'll notice is that, again, post 2015, you'll really notice that we track the long-term trends of the groundwater levels much better. And again, I'll show you a couple other hydrographs here in a minute. All right, so in summary, we may kind of broken this down into kind of left and right hand side. On the left hand side, you have some of the model refinements. This is what I just went over. We looked at irrigation efficiency. Ultimately, we improved the irrigation efficiency throughout most of the subbasin. We have slight reductions in riparian surface water diversions, although that has been updated to reflect the best available data from the Cal Water's database, as well as doing a minor recalibration of the stream system, looking at a combination of water budget parameters, groundwater hydrographs, stream system hydrographs, and ultimately reduce the stream conductance. On the right-hand side, you kind of see a ballpark, how does that impact the water budget overall? And so what you'll see here, kind of in the upper section here, we looked at a combination. There is reduced groundwater pumping, but there's also reduced deep percolation. And so you'll notice that these two are very similar to each other. And that's because out of the 5 to 7% that you're seeing here, we would say that the impact is related about 7% of the deep percolation and pumping was reduced due to the increases of irrigation efficiency. On the other hand, the reduction in surface water supply overall means our groundwater pumping isn't reduced by quite as much. That's simply because of the need to pump a little bit more to make up for that surface water supply. And then the lower two are kind of the overall dynamics with the system. How does that system respond to our operational conditions because of the additional demand related to increased surface water, the increased demand related to reduced surface water supply? We see a little bit of additional stream aquifer interaction, again, highly tied to the refinement and calibration of that. And overall, we see a slight reduction in aquifer storage by about 4,000 acre feet per year. So then take a look at the overall water budget for anyone who's been kind of, participating with us over the years. This is very similar to the water budget you've seen in annual reports and in the previous JSP. But overall, I just really wanted to kind of highlight the entire water budget, not just where we have the operational conditions, then we have how the system responds. Ultimately, though, what you can see from a value perspective rather than the percentages that were available in the previous slide. As I said, ultimately, the change in storage has seen an impact by about 4,000 acre feet, just under, bringing our total cumulative or our change in storage on an annual basis by about 46,000 acre feet per year. And what are some of the impacts? Again, groundwater pumping is reduced due to increased irrigation efficiency, but with that goes deep percolation. We do see a little reduced surface water supply, and that's why these two don't see a direct one-to-one relationship. In addition to that, because of that reduced supply, we see a little bit slightly reduced groundwater levels. We do see slightly more gain from stream, even though the conductance between the two was decreased. So then to take a look at, well, how does that look like comparatively? So on the next couple of slides, what I've provided is a culmination of groundwater hydrographs kind of spread throughout the subbasin. Ultimately, what we'll do is we'll take a look at both the stream systems. We'll kind of to Stanislaus to the north, groundwater levels in the south along the Tuolumne River, and then I'll grab a couple hydrographs kind of from the more closer to the middle of the basin. Overall, though, what you're going to see is that in general, we didn't make major impacts to the model. We had fine-tuned the model, we refined the model, we provided it with some better information, but you're not going to see anything catastrophically different. And so what we kind of see here is I've got three real things to point out. One, you'll see that the observed data represented in the black dots, and then you'll see two lines, the dark blue in the updated model and the gray in the older model, which is similar to what was available in the annual report. And so what you can kind of see here is on the kind of western side of the basin, west to the west-north, very minimal impact overall to the changes. You can see here that we track the trends with the groundwater system very well, although it is difficult to follow the absolute values of every single well. And so when you notice here, as an example of that, in kind of head lateral 8, you can see that we track the long-term trends. We the water budget dynamics are fairly consistent, but there is some variance between the observed data. There is residual there. As we move a little bit further to the east, and a little bit closer to the river, this is where you'll notice some of the greater impacts in the system. And this is where you'll see that we track, the refinements to the model do track the observed data a little bit better in both regards. But this is kind of one of the things I really wanted to kind of highlight here is, that there are still limitations to the model. I think that's something I kind of highlight fairly consistently, is that, as a significant regional model, our goal is to target a lot of the regional flow dynamics, regional groundwater levels and systems. But when it comes to high resolution changes, that there is going to be some variance. And so one of the things you can kind of see here, and you'll notice that there are two wells kind of very close proximity to each other. And simply due to the resolution of the model, you'll notice that in some instances, we are under tracking, particularly in this last couple of years, we're under tracking comparatively to the observed data. Similarly, in a very similar location, the model is overestimating groundwater levels comparatively to observed data. And again, this is simply just a limitation in resolution of the model, resolution of data. And so overall, though, what we do is we try to target a regional blend and kind of hit these two right in the middle. And you'll notice that kind of as a kind of consistent trend as we look at these hydrographs. So again, moving on a little bit further to the east, as we kind of get into the kind of the Riverbank Oakdale area, but again, focusing on along the Stanislaus River. You'll see both iterations of model track the observed data reasonably well, although particularly in the last 10 years post our last calibration, you do see some variance. We are kind of we are really, the refinements to the stream system helped us kind of pull that into a little bit better of alignment. We're able to kind of track some of the more recent dips that we see in the observed data. And that's principally allowed, you see that much more clearly looking at this well here on the right-hand side. Again, same overall trend where we're slightly under in one well, but nearby we're slightly over in another. But I think now that we've made these refinements, we're able to track that kind of long-term trends and the continued decline of groundwater levels over the past 10 years. All right, moving to the Tuolumne River, we've kind of broken this up and we can see two wells, one kind of in the middle west side, and then another one a little bit further to the east. Here's where you'll notice, again, we don't see a lot of significant impacts on our simulation of groundwater levels. The model does track both of these fairly well, but in general, we see a slight improvement comparatively to the previous iteration of the model. And then here we grabbed a couple wells in the middle of the subbasin. Again, this is really kind of to highlight that, even it's not just when we look at things like stream conductance or stream aquifer interaction, you don't just impact the groundwater system adjacent to the river, but you really affect the entire basin. And so that's a couple of things you can see here that, with these changes, we do see some variance. Again, tracking the trends overall pretty good. And particularly as we kind of look to the kind of the center west or center east sections of the basin, we're able to kind of capture those trends a little bit better. Okay. So now that I've been able to walk through some of the historical model refinements, the next step is to look at the baseline. And so the baseline really looks at what do projected conditions in the Modesto subbasin, what is that going to look like over, the planning horizon. And so similar to the historical model, we wanted to look at a few major topics here. And I'll go over to each of these in more detail, right? But to kind of give you a sneak peek of what we're going to look at. On one hand, we're looking at the model framework. What we're going to do is we're going to extend what is currently a 50-year baseline. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a 15-year implementation period. And I'll show you what that means in a second. But in addition to that, because we certainly understand that our operations change and have changed significantly from 2015 to 2024, 2015 to 2025, we want to make sure that we capture the latest and greatest information when it comes to both our urban and agricultural operations. And so to that effect, one of the major things that just kind of for you to keep in mind as we go over the next data sets, from an agricultural perspective, we're updating the land use. Again, making sure that the GSP, both the previous and the upcoming GSP, are utilizing the latest and greatest, the best available information. And so we're going to update the land use, and then we're going to pull some of the data that I talked about previously, looking at modern operations, modern surface water supplies, in irrigation dynamics that we have. We want to make sure we update that into the baseline, as well as looking at our urban water systems. And so not just were the agricultural water management plans updated in 2025, but also the municipalities within the subbasin updated their urban water management plan. And so that was another thing, is we want to take a dive looking at the latest and greatest information. So we'll take a look at a combination of population, per capita water use, as well as urban expansion, and looking at a lot of the conservation recharge efforts that each of the municipalities have been undertaking over the past decade. Okay, so the first step is to take a look at the model framework. And so for perspective, the previous GSP and what is demanded by the Department of Water Resources is that they say that each GSP must include a 50-year period that can show sustainability conditions. And so effectively, that's what we had for the previous or the original GSP. One of the things that we think can be a strong improvement to our ability to forecast conditions is to build in what we're calling an implementation period. And this is particularly as we move from today to a 2042. Now, 2042 is a deadline by Sigma. It is the legislatively mandated point at which says from 2042 on, all medium and low priority basins, which includes the Modesto subbasin, must be sustainable by this date. And so that's effectively what we're working on. That is the finish line. And our goal behind that period is to be able to better represent and understand the uncertainty between A, now, and B, 2042. And so particularly to empower ourselves when we look at our projects and management actions, we can give ourselves the time and understand what the impacts of implementation are over that period, right? Do we build out projects tomorrow? Do we build them out 10 years from now? When we look at our management actions in the groundwater use management plan, right? For those that are involved, you may remember that there is a kind of an on-ramping period of different levels of management actions and different levels of severity. And so we want to make sure that we incorporate that ramping up period such that by 2042, we are fully sustainable. At which point we actually then have our 50-year mandated simulation, at which point that's what we're going to call our sustainable period. And effectively what that does is that says, okay, now all of our projects and management actions are in place. And what we're going to do is we're going to forecast that out and make sure that we stay sustainable over that 50-year planning horizon. So what we're doing ultimately, though, is expanding that 50-year period to a 65-year model run that is representative of these two periods. The other thing you may notice on this slide here is the hydrology, kind of represented in this kind of slightly lighter gray color here. And one of the things is that we want to make sure that we acknowledge that there is uncertainty with our future. And one of the major uncertainties we have is, what does the hydrology look like, right? We could go through a wet period, we could go through a dry period. We don't know, and we want to make sure that we can plan for that. And so in order to understand how that uncertainty may impact our overall management of the subbasin, what we do is as part of these two periods, we want to build out what we consider both a wet, typical, and a dry period. Now, these are being predominantly applied to the implementation period, and that's because of the relatively short timeline. As you would imagine, if we go through a 5-year drought, that impacts a 15-year hydrology much more than it impacts the 50-year simulation. And so because of that, we really just want to make sure that we understand in a critical time over the next 15 years, as we implement our projects and management actions, that we understand the variability of our hydrology and what that could mean for our long-term sustainability. All right, so what does that look like as far as looking at our overall hydrology? So principally, though, you can kind of see there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, right? And so the historical period going from 91 through 2025. One of the things you can really see here is that we do capture droughts and we do capture wet periods, and we expect to continue that variability into the future. And so you kind of see that as a breakdown represented kind of here in this middle section. At least what I'm showing right now is kind of what we consider as average conditions or typical hydrology. And then finally, we kind of on the right-hand side, we look at what does that 50-year projection look like, where we capture, a lot of the historical droughts, the historical wet periods over time, and to helps us really understand what the impacts of those hydrologic sequences will have on the basin as a whole. Okay, so then once we have the hydrology in place, the next step is to take a look at some of the agricultural operations. And so when looking at the agricultural sectors, there's really a couple major things that we wanted to take a look at. First, we wanted to make sure that we use the best available data when it comes to land use. And so to do this, what we did is we looked at the Department of Water Resources. It provides a statewide ground truth land use survey. We utilize that information. That's kind of what you can see here on the right-hand side. But not only that, but we also wanted to combine that with the urban water management plans, the master plans that are available from the municipalities, to make sure that we don't just capture today's land use, but we also have the ability to capture some of the urban expansion that we're anticipating in future years. In addition to that, we also know that in the historical model, I already talked a little bit about the improved and refined irrigation efficiency and the associated water demand there. We want to make sure that we take that information and we apply that to our projected conditions as well. In addition to that, we also, again, through a combination looking at the Cal Waters database for riparian users, by looking at the the agricultural water management plans from MID and OID, we want to make sure that the surface water supply reflects the latest and greatest information and operations as far as our surface water supply and our groundwater pumping, to make sure that we are able to kind of reconcile and that we are in line with some of the district operations and some of the non-district dynamics. So the first step to take a look at that is looking at our land use and cropping patterns. This is what drives the biggest factors of our water budget, is the consumptive use related to a combination of native and agricultural land use. So what you'll notice is a couple major things. But before I kind of get to the chart here, looking on the right-hand side, just to make sure that I have perspective, is that you're going to see that there are two columns here. One represents the data that is available in the original GSP. Now, due to availability of data, when DWR had released and published their crop surveys, the GSP relies on a 2014 data set. Now that DWR is able to publish that information more regularly and at a quicker rate, we are able to look at the periodic evaluation. We'll utilize data set that is available that is representative of the 2024 land use. Now, again, you'll notice there has been 2025 in between those 2 points. But one of the things is, again, as I said, usually takes DWR some time. So as the 2025 data is provisional, it's under review by the Department of Water Resources, and it's not publicly available for utilization. So that's why we're using the most recent available data is 2024. And so that's what we're basing our information on. And so one of the two main highlights that you'll see when comparing these two, and as I'm sure is no surprise to anyone, is that over this decade, we've really seen two main things. One is we are seeing a lot of an increase in permanent crops, particularly almonds throughout the subbasin. And with that, we're also seeing a decrease in non-irrigated land. And so that's going to naturally have an impact in our water budget. Not only are we moving from either a combination of native or fallow lands, and we're putting orchards into production. You'll see, and you can see here that that increase of orchards moves from about 47 to 69,000 acres of almonds and pistachios within the subbasin. And so you can see that's a jump by about a little over 22,000 acres of additional almonds that have gone into production. And you can see in the inverse of that, as we move from a combination of 70,000 acre feet of idle land, 70,000 acre feet of native vegetation and 19,000 acre feet of idle land. So this is unirrigated, the combination is unirrigated, about 90,000 acres. You can see that in the 2024 period, over that decade, we see that moves from about 90,000 down to 68 plus 5, or about 73,000. So it kind of the inverse of the changes of those almonds and pistachios that we see down here. In addition to that, we also see some, although to much lesser degree, we see some conversions from actively irrigated crops. We see that conversion also being attributed to moving to more almonds within the subbasin. So ultimately we anticipate this to drive our demand and our agricultural operations significantly. So what does that mean when we look at the kind of the long-term conditions? So if we look at two of those data sets and then we project that out, because that's the goal of this simulation, is you'll notice the historical period, and you can kind of see that trend occurring over the long term, right? So again, we started in that 2015 period. That's similar to what the previous projected conditions baseline looked like. But as we've continued to have our annual reports, after we've updated the model every year, you kind of see that trend gradually increasing as we put more and more almonds into production. And so then we get into what we consider the current horizon or the implementation period. And this is where you see a combination of things. And so really what this is most heavily done is this is being driven by a combination of the latest land use data with our anticipation or urban expansion. And so that's where you can kind of see the urban up here on the top. You'll see a slight increase of urban land use and a slight decrease of the other agricultural fields. Now, where we have this information, particularly around the city of Modesto, who's been able to provide a wealth of information, is what this is doing is as the city of Modesto expands or is anticipated to expand, we're pulling that acreage out of production spatially. And so there is a spatial component there. And then the planning horizon for those plans is usually around 2040. We're freezing it at 2042, again, so that it aligns with our implementation period. Therefore, the projected conditions baseline, that 50-year period, has very consistent land use and demands. Okay, so then the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure, though, that because we acknowledge that certainly as you increase land use and that is going to increase demand, we want to make sure that we have the ability to validate that in the real world from multiple data sets, so we don't just rely on the land use data from DWR. And so one of the things that we can do as we assess that is to compare that to some of the consumptive use tools that we have available. And so one of the things that we did is we wanted to make sure that we compare the last decade of information, particularly the land use that we just looked at. And we want to compare that to the program that's called OpenET. Effectively, what this is remote sensing data uses satellite imagery to estimate evapotranspiration in not only this subbasin, but across the entire United States, although obviously we're going to focus on the Modesto subbasin. So really what you can kind of see here is a couple of things. One is in line with that increase of almonds and the increased production area that we have is the increased consumptive use and the production demand. so that's where you kind of see that long-term trend. Now, you will see some variance here, particularly the drop in these couple of years. This is often due to hydrology, right? This is if it rains kind of later in the springtime, we don't have as much irrigation demand in the early season. And so that's why you'll see some variance here. This also takes into account things like cloud cover, wind speed, a lot of other dynamics there. But what we can ultimately see is that over the past 10 years, which is what a lot of this information is based on, we do see an increase in consumptive use. And so we want to make sure that we can kind of capture that trend and the latest current conditions to be able to project forward with the most accurate means that we have. Okay, so now that we've got an idea of what's occurring with on the demand side, the next question is to say, okay, well, what does the surface water and the supply side look like? And so again, this is really referencing a combination of the Cal Waters database and the agricultural water management plans. And so a couple things you'll notice here is that comparatively similar to the previous slides, I show the historical, the implementation period, and then divided by the sustainability period. And so what we have on the right-hand side, though, is a comparison between the previous GSP, the original GSP that we submitted 5 years ago, and what we're simulating and the projected conditions today. And so one of the things you can see is the variance in surface water supply. And so overall, particularly in MID, we do see about a 10% reduction overall. This is reflective of their most current conditions and representative of their ag water management plans and long-term projections. We see about 10% reduction in agricultural supply. But when it comes to things like our urban water supply, because of the increase in the expansion of land use, the city of Modesto and MID have a contract to provide water based on the footprint of the service area of the city. And so we do see a slight increase in our municipal water supply, again, based on that footprint and their allocation from the district. When it comes to OID, we can see overall fairly consistent. We do see a slight reduction in overall surface water supply, but overall less than 1%. And then on the other hand, the riparian water supply, you'll see changes a little bit greater as a percent, about 2,000 acre feet less overall. But this is very heavily driven by the improvement in the resolution and available data that is provided by Cal Waters rather than our previous large-scale estimations. So then when it comes to looking at our urban operations, again, this is kind of balancing our demand and supply. We see a couple major things. And overall, you'll notice that we actually are anticipating a reduction in our urban water demand and our municipal water demand. And this is going to be principally related to the state mandated conservation efforts that they've had. So back in 2015, during the drought, the state said you must reduce all your demand 20% by 2020. And all of our municipalities within the basin were successful in achieving that. Now, again, those conservation efforts usually impact their per person water use. So we are balancing that 20% reduction in per person water use, and that we're balancing population growth with that, right? So one goes up, the other goes down. And so there's the combination of those two things. But we were able to leverage their urban water management plans and their long-term projections to get an understanding of what the long-term urban water supply and demand would look like. And so overall, we can see we are anticipating lesser population growth and an increase in conservation and water use efficiency in the urban areas. Okay, so at least at a qualitative level, because I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, I really kind of want to just before we get into the specific water budgets, really kind of show you, well, what do we anticipate with all those changes, right? And so in general, if we take each of those major refinements one by one, first of all, with the increase in land use, of course, we anticipate an increase in applied water demand, an increase in ET or the consumptive use, and ultimately with that, we anticipate an increase in our groundwater, net groundwater use. In addition to that, the refinement to the irrigation efficiency that we had in the historical model, we're carrying that over into the projected conditions. As you would imagine, as we increase our irrigation efficiency, our applied water goes down, but our efficiency does not impact our overall consumptive use or our net groundwater use. Finally, we look at overall with our reduced surface water supply due to the improved information. We do anticipate more groundwater pumping as surface water obviously does not impact things like demand or consumptive use, but it does impact our groundwater use. So overall, we just want to make sure that we want to acknowledge that we anticipate increased demand from our land use, and that things like irrigation efficiency and surface water supply don't have a major impact in our net groundwater use, although surface water supply will impact it a little bit. Okay, so at least, and again, before I get to some of the numbers, we're going to kind of at least walk through what our water budget looks like and how it dynamically impacts a lot of these things, right? So we have increased land use, we have increased irrigation efficiency, and we have a reduced surface water supply. All those things go into that operational water budget that you've seen before, and then that operational budget, it makes its way into the groundwater system. And so overall, what we can see is that these are kind of like the operational conditions that we have to, really control and impact our system, whether that is either in a positive or a negative light. But these are what we have mostly we have the control over. And so from a water use perspective, again, this is what this is as far as the supply and demand goes. As you'd imagine, our demand is going slightly up due to increases in land use. We anticipate a slight in the agricultural. I'm going to focus on the agricultural sector. We have a slight increase in demand. We have decreases in surface water supply overall as a combination of MID, a little bit from OID, and then a little bit from the non-district west area and the riparian users. But ultimately, we do anticipate the net of these being our net groundwater use. We expect our groundwater pumping to go up overall. In addition to that, we also, on the urban side, we're looking at less demand, a little bit more surface water supply. So the urban and municipal side, we expect to see a slight reduction in our overall groundwater use. So what does that mean for the operational budget? Well, in addition to just the use, there's also then the aspect of incorporating that irrigation efficiency, right? So again, efficiency makes our pumping a little bit less, but it's being offset by land use. But on the other side, because of our increased efficiency, we're percolating a little bit. We're percolating less. And so overall, when we look at our overall operational budget, when we look at the kind of the full sustainability period, we anticipate being with no action, we anticipate being a net extractor from the groundwater system. So then now's the opportunity to kind of build the other side of the water budget. And so on one hand, we looked at how our land surface operations and how that dynamics works within the groundwater budget. Then we take a look at how does the basin respond. And so that really brings into a couple of things: subsurface flow, stream aquifer interaction, and aquifer storage. So these are where kind of the dynamic physical constraints that we have within the basin. In STGBA, these are all things that we are responsible for. We cannot look at just something like just aquifer storage and groundwater levels, but STGBA does impact. We cannot induce significant and unreasonable stream aquifer interaction. That's why we're doing the ISW analysis, and we cannot induce additional subsurface flow from our neighbors. And so just making sure that we want to understand the full dynamics of the system. Okay, so then taking a look at the overall water budget, again, as we kind of build all of this into one big understanding of the system, what we can see here is
All right, guys, I think we're missing these last slides. Yeah. Go ahead, Dominic.
Oh, okay. Okay, so then when looking at the groundwater budget, we can kind of see what are the impacts all of these changes have made. And so ultimately, similar but a little different than the historical model, you'll notice that the groundwater pumping, we do expect a slight increase to a groundwater pumping and a relatively significant decrease in depercolation, right? So this is a combination of things. This is that combination of increased land use and the demand associated with that increased land use, as well as the increase in irrigation efficiency and the decrease of depercolation associated with that. So if these two kind of are be seen from those major changes, the other impacts that we can see is a little bit less canal recharge due from the reduction in surface water supply, as well as our increase in our stream and aquifer interaction. Overall, though, what we're anticipating is a change in storage of about 24,000 acre feet. Now, this is an increase comparatively to our change in storage that we have under the old GSP. But again, the biggest thing here is that it uses the latest available information, captures the most recent operational and land use conditions, and without any actions, without any projects, this is what we anticipate the long-term decline in the basin to look like. Okay. So again, taking a look at the big picture, the kind of the summary, the major baseline refinements that we have. Again, we increase from the model framework perspective. We increased the simulation period by about 15 years to build in that implementation period to make sure that we can understand both the near-term impacts as well as the longer term when it comes to looking at our management actions. In addition to that, we did refine our agricultural operations to the latest and greatest. The biggest one being the incorporation of the 2024 DWR land use survey, as well as incorporating the local ag water management plans that were released this past year. And in addition to the agricultural sector, from the urban side, we utilize their 2025 urban water management plans to make sure that we have a good understanding and projections of both their current and their long-term anticipated conditions. Impacts on the water budget overall, what we can see is that we anticipate an increase in groundwater pumping to correlate with our increase in demand. We anticipate a decrease in deep percolation to be relative to the changes to irrigation efficiency and the increases to demands, right? So that one kind of gets a double hit there from those two changes as well. And because of that, we anticipate a decrease in overall aquifer storage. And as groundwater levels increase, what we anticipate is the stream aquifer conditions, right? We're pulling more surface water out of the streams to replenish the groundwater system. So the culmination of all those things, we expect to be a kind of a net impact comparatively to the previous model of about 12,000 acre feet per year. And so, but ultimately, right, the biggest driver to this really is that change in land use, and that we have continued to grow our demand when it comes to our groundwater use, our reliance on groundwater. So as far as kind of how does that impact the GSP overall when we look at it from kind of a planning perspective? And so first and foremost, we certainly want to acknowledge that the model is different and it has different numbers, and the water budgets have been refined. But we firmly believe that these refinements are better. We are using the latest and greatest data. We've improved the resolution. We've been able to look at more recent data, and so our understanding of the current conditions of the baseline are stronger. That kind of goes hand in hand with kind of the on the left bottom side that you see here is that really what this is doing, that by leveraging the current data, we're able to project the long-term conditions much more effectively, and to be able to support the periodic evaluation and 5-year update. And then as you know, and then just in general, I want to make sure to remind everybody, right, that the C2V Sim model is a living model. We expected to change this. We anticipate not just this iteration, but another, whether it's the annual reports, whether it's the following 5-year update and periodic evaluation, every time we we take a step towards our sustainability, we want to make sure that we're using the latest and greatest information, and we will continue to refine the model with that latest information. And then finally, you'll notice that here we want to make sure that we want to highlight that we do not anticipate any management changes. We are going through an evaluation and update to the GSP, but we specifically developed the groundwater, particularly the groundwater use management plan, as well as any other management actions, is that because of those were forecasted to have a ramping up nature to them to account for a lot of the uncertainty, that we want to make sure that we are updating the GSP separately from refinement of those management actions, and that those management actions are anticipated to be kind of considered for refinement in the 2030 time horizon, so a few years from now. Okay, so the last thing I want to kind of highlight before I'll turn it over to y'all for questions is to kind of give you, again, to circle all the way back to that roadmap. I'd love to kind of keep in touch with everybody over the coming months. And so in line with that, we want to make sure that everybody here knows that we're going to continue to have these GSA meetings and look at a wide variety of topics. So today you'll notice in the June meeting, we're looking at the historical model and the projected conditions as well as those first 2 bullets on our roadmap. At our next meeting is going to be Liz will be providing the SMC analysis, where we look at things like subsidence and groundwater dependent ecosystems, also some corrective actions and things we wanted to take a look at in this GSP update. And then in August and September, we'll return to some of the modeling results and look at, well, what are the results of the interconnected surface water system, and what do our projects and management actions look like, right? We have been, in addition to updating the latest historical data, we also want to make sure that we have been continuing to find a lot of the agencies within the subbasin have been continuing to move forward with their projects and their management actions, and we want to make sure that we can get those into the model, simulate those conditions, and making sure we have an understandable and a good path towards long-term sustainability. Okay, so thank you for your time. I'll turn it back over to Eric if anyone has any comments or questions or would like to chat.
Thanks, Dominic. All right, we'll start with member agencies. Any comments, questions for Dominic on the presentation?
Good question. Dominic, you mentioned that there was a slight change from moving from historical baseline with respect to surface water accounting to using the data from the state data set.
Mhm.
Could you give us an idea about what that slight change the number might be?
Sure, absolutely. I think I have that in here.
Thank you.
Let me make sure I find the correct slide here. Here we go. Sorry, I'm a little finicky. So effectively, though, what you can see here, not just from the Cal Waters, which is representing the riparian water source, and so this is what it has in Cal Waters. In the previous GSP for the projected conditions, we were estimating about 14,800 acre feet per year. That was a data set developed by the Department of Water Resources. Now, as we are moving to the Cal Waters data, which again is from the state board, has much higher resolution information, both from the point of diversion, the place of use, as much higher resolution as far as where it is being located so that we can simulate that. Also, it is being leveraged using a combination of actual reported data as opposed to potential water rights. And so because of that shift in data set and methodology, we see that we're anticipating the long-term average surface water supply of riparian users to be 13,700. And so overall, that's a change of about 2,500 acre feet per year.
Great, thank you. Just a quick follow-up question. So I just heard you say that it's a combination of the reported data and the historical data. Is that correct? So the change, the difference of 2,500 would not be assumed to be just based on non-reporting by landowners. Is that correct?
Correct. So how we're taking the historical data and then projecting that forward is a combination of the things. The biggest one is what we're doing is we're looking over the past 10 years of that measured historical data, and we're looking at the hydrology associated with it, right? So how much water is diverted in a wet year versus a dry year. And then what we're doing is we're assuming that those trends continue, right? So that in a critically dry year, if there is an estimate of in the critically dry year, if a riparian user diverts X acre feet, that they will continue to do that in critical years. And that varies across each of the 5 hydrologic year types that we base this analysis on.
I see. Thank you.
Any questions?
Dominic, this is Mike from Waterford. I do have one question regarding the land use and crop patterns slide.
Okay.
I see that you're showing slight growth in urban square acres, I guess, and you're showing a slight increase up to 42, but then from 42 on, you don't show any increase. Is there a reason why you did not assume some sort of a small growth in urban footprint?
Yeah, so effectively what we're doing is we utilize kind of a combination of the management plans and the master plans that we have available, and all those projections project out to 2040. And the reason why we don't project beyond that is it's very similar to kind of the reason why we don't forecast agricultural growth, is that we utilize the best tools that we have, where folks have looked into things, something like urban expansion specifically, and we take that overall projection, but we don't want to make any assumptions that were beyond that point. And so that's why very similar to kind of urban expansions follows that long-term trend, but we also do the same thing with agricultural use. We don't anticipate any, market-driven impacts to agricultural or urban land use.
Yeah, I can definitely see the agricultural side of things because you just don't know what the crop pattern is going to be throughout the history or future. But I guess I would like to make sure that there's at least a comment or some sort of a paragraph or something that identifies the fact that you kept urban flat through that period, the projected conditions period, but you're not by any means saying that the urban cities cannot grow during that period, because I don't want to have, yeah, we all have a general plan. Our general plan ends somewhere probably between now and 2040 something, but there is going to be some additional growth. We continue to get hit by the state of California on the need to grow and increase units for sale and for rent. And I just want to make sure that we don't have a document that's basically saying that we can't grow. There needs to be something that just identifies that you just didn't want to anticipate the growth pattern.
Yeah, of course. Well, we'll make sure that we're both very clear on what our methodology is, the reasoning for it, and add that caveat that this is not limiting any future projections from that perspective.
Thank you.
I think we do say in the GWMP, if I remember correctly, that the cities are going to stick with what they're using currently as far as their demand, which doesn't necessarily mean they can't grow. It just means they have to find another source or become more efficient in the future.
That's correct. But unfortunately, what it does also mean is when we talk about efficiency and the lack of deep percolation associated with efficiency as the cities expand, that's also going to reduce the deep percolation. I just can't imagine us throwing some drip irrigation is the same as an orchard that's got drip irrigation. They're putting a lot more water in that same area. So to me, I just want to make sure that that we develop a plan that works for everyone, including the cities.
Any other questions, comments from the audience? Okay, we'll open it up to the public here in the room first. Yes.
I took it that you say there's going to be a reduction in surface water available for agriculture. Why is that?
So, sorry, just to make sure I heard you because you're a little quiet. You're asking why we're anticipating a reduction in surface water supply?
Yeah.
So the reason for that is we don't necessarily anticipate a reduction in surface water supply comparatively to today. What we see is a reduced surface water supply comparatively to the previous GSP. And so hopefully this figure on kind of on the left-hand side can kind of show that. Is that you'll notice here, particularly in the past 10 years, what we're doing is we're looking at the 2015 through 2025 data, right? A decade of operational information, and we're forecasting those same operations forward into the future. And so that's what you'll see. So for example, to this, right, you'll notice that comparatively to the previous JSP, you'll see a reduction of about 10% or 12,000 acre feet compared to the MID agriculture. And so one of the reasons for that is because we are averaging this last 10 years, if you can kind of see my cursor here, looking at the historical data comparatively to the full period here. And so one of the things that we can see is that by looking at historical data, particularly in the 1991 through, let's say 2012, 2013, 2013 is drought. So let's say 2012, you can see here that average period here, by purely looking at historical data, is greater than the last decade of historical information. And so what we're doing is we're projecting the last decade of data. And so because that we're using kind of a sliding time scale and we're looking at the most recent information to project into the future, that the historical data reflects that reduction.
Can you show Fogarty? Mr. Fogarty, can you make sure that the green light's on that? If it's not, then press the button for it. You have to hold it down.
Thanks.
Thank you.
There was a couple comments. You had the trend was up for ag water use. I kind of question that one. And then pumping is up for long term. And then you had increased land use irrigation. If anything, I see land going out of irrigated agriculture. Did I hear you right?
Yeah,
I mean,
so all of our data associated with land use comes from two primary land use surveys. The Department of Water Resources releases land use surveys every single year. Actually, let's look at this slide here real quick. And what you'll notice here is, right, DWR provides land use data every year throughout our historical period. And so what we're seeing here, comparatively to 2015, which is what our previous GSP baseline was based off of, if you look at that, you'll notice that that trend in agriculture, particularly in our permanent crops and our almonds, we see that as growing over time. Now, what these surveys say in comparatively, that over that decade split is that almonds in particular grew from 47,000 acres to 69,000 acres, right? So about 22,000 acre difference. And so this is based on a land use surveys.
yeah, but I don't see how you can project that when I can see ground that was almonds is going fallow on the east side. And so I think your assumption is kind of off, going to be off in the future, I think, unless some miraculous water supply shows up.
So I think it's kind of important. So what we're considering, the projected conditions baseline considers no major management actions or projects, right? We'll get into those scenarios in the future. What this scenario does is it looks at the current land use as well as projected urban growth, and it kind of marries the two to kind of see as, hey, if we don't have management actions, if we don't have projects, what might this look like, right? And I can't forecast in the future what, again, similar to the previous question, what market forces will drive, different land use patterns. And so our goal is to take a look at the best available data, and the best data that we have is the current land use, and carry that forward into the future.
Yeah, I think the confusion is, Dominic, and the thing people need to realize is right there on the slide here. So original GSP was done in 2022.
Yeah.
And back then, the best available data, crop data, was 2014.
Yeah.
That's a big difference between having 2024 data today. So we're using current data. It's just that it's so far off because, 5 years ago, we were using 2014 data,
Right.
and we were in 22.
Okay.
So that's why the big change. It's not as much that what you're seeing today is coming out and all that sort of thing, because they're updating much more frequently, only year behind, so 2 years behind. So that's why you're seeing that.
Okay.
And that's why you're seeing the pumping increase and those sorts of things.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that adequate or accurate, Dominic?
Yep. Yes.
Good afternoon. Wrangler Wheeler, farmer in MID and non-district west. Majority of my questions are going to be more on the non-district west side of things today. Thank you, Dominic, for the update on the models. It's a lot of the things that we've talked about in the past few meetings, and it's good to see that a lot of things are being implemented. And I think that a majority of us understand that it is a living model and is meant to be changing throughout as information becomes more relatively available for us. I do want to reiterate in conversations we've had in past that a majority of deep water wells in the non-district west are either a secondary or emergency source of water. And obviously any surface water available is being used first. So I am thankful to see a lot of those changes being made into the model. I understand too that the model can't exactly be perfect, but I do think that a majority of these deep water wells should have pretty available information based on electric use. For how often they're used and kind of the volumes that they are being used. I'm not sure what that looks like in your guys's as a board available information to gather, but a majority of them are probably powered by MID, I'm assuming. So there's going to be some kind of way to track where some of that information is coming, how often they're being used, because I know that in majority of the ones that I'm aware of are not used on an annual basis whatsoever. A couple of your updates did spark a few questions. I have probably more based towards you, Christy, being a steward of non-district west. I know in the past meetings we've requested a maybe open forum meeting or some kind of a gathering of non-district west members not just including agricultural members, but including community members of Del Rio water users and City of Riverbank. I think should be pretty involved in that. And I wanted to know if you had any kind of update on maybe getting together on something similar to that. I know that you guys had one for non-district east that seemed to be pretty beneficial as in a whole of getting everyone on the same page. So I think that'd be really good to continue to push for non-district west based meetings. And then I'm not sure if I understand correctly based on following of the county meetings, but it appears that you guys are in search and or looking for potentially a second consultant to do consulting reporting on non-district east and non-district west. And I was just wondering on kind of what that future looks like. If you guys have retained a consultant yet, what potential costs are going to be, and then if there's a relative game plan of once we do have two reports, kind of how do we mismanage those if we have two separate reports kind of running? So
You want to address that on the next item?
perfect. Thank you guys.
Go ahead. Oh, I could tell with you.
Tom, I had a question about the interconnected surface water slide where you talk about gaining and losing streams.
Okay.
I was wondering if you were able to figure out with this new improved model where this losing stream, where the concentration of the losses occur, and if you're able to split those up based on the groundwater management area.
So as part of the previous GSP, we have provided, we utilize the model to look at stream nodes. They're spaced approximately every half mile. And we provided a estimate of gaining, losing, or if it's kind of mixes around zero. Those are the previous versions of that are in the GSP utilizing the older model. We are anticipating providing that type of information at the next meeting when we look at our interconnected surface water. So I don't have it on hand, as obviously not part of this presentation, but I'm happy to have that conversation once that analysis has been complete, and we expect to present it to the group.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, so in this newer model, you can differentiate, or you should be able to, or are planning on to in the future, where the losing streams are based on the management area? Or does the model just show just a whole basin approach? You're able to split it up, is that right?
Yeah, so this is a summary of kind of the whole basin. I'm trying to kind of just provide a high level of overview of some of the changes that we've made. When we do the ISW analysis and we present that to the GSA, we will have that information and it will be on a nodal basis. And so effectively, every half mile we'll be able to provide that that scale of data. And so I would at least caution though that the data is not presented at a management area level. It is presented at a nodal basis, right? So you'll see on a map effectively every node and roughly how much stream aquifer interaction is there, but it won't be summarized, right? Instead, that says one management area is X and another management area is Y.
Got it. So that goes. Now I have another question. So the model in general, the results are based on a subbasin level, or you're able to split off other things like, pumping changes, gains, and all of that by management area? Or is everything in the model based on a nodal level?
So a model calculates things at a combination of what's called nodes and elements, right? That's where the model calculates the data. The results of the model can be aggregated to either a combination of areas. Sometimes we look at management areas in the subbasin. Other times we look at districts and various sub areas. as you'll know from, when we've presented in the past on some of the annual reports, right, we generally present things like pumping, deep percolation at a management area level.
Okay, so you are able to break things up into a management area level, but you're not forecasting that for ISW.
So I'd say we're currently in the process of the ISW analysis. And so what I think is important though is particularly when it comes to our stream system, right, is that we look at it at a scale that is, cognizant of all the basin's conditions, right? We know that a lot of the groundwater response and the dynamics there are not fully the ownership of one management area or the other. And so what we like to do is look at it at that either a combination of the nodal level, the basin level, and kind of determine what the depletions look like.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm following you. Would you be able to explain that a little bit better? Because if you can pinpoint an area where a stream is losing
Mhm.
and it's in a certain management area, wouldn't you attribute that to that management area?
Our management areas do not operate in a vacuum. And so because of that, right, we look at regional dynamics. We can look at individual stream reaches and stream nodes, but our analysis is expected to look at a basin scale. Now, if there's a desire for the GSA to look at it in a different way, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, great. I think you answered my question that it is a basin level model. I was just wondering what the current model is called or models.
So the current model is a derivative of the C2V sim model. That sounds for this California Central Valley simulation model. It is based on a derivative of that called the C2V sim fine grid. And so as part of the previous GSP development, you'll notice it's called the C2V sim TM, and that TM stands for Turlock and Modesto. The model was refined in the Turlock and the Modesto subbasins beyond what the original C2V sim model was built as.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Anybody else here in the room?
Turn the softener on. Nope, got a red light. I want to just clarify something. You want me talking two at the same time?
No, you're fine.
I didn't have that much to say.
It's fine.
So
I can see you. I can see and hear you here, so you're good.
okay, all right. I just want to clarify something. I got information the other day, and so the plan that we approved, the GSA members approved a few months ago, vote 7-0 vote, right? Now, there was a letter that was sent to STRGBA last summer, if I'm correct, from EKI, and it was addressing issues about our plan. Is that correct?
Are you referring to the groundwater use management program?
Yeah.
I believe there was a letter specific to that from EKI.
Do you know the date of that letter? Was that July 28, 2025? Was the date that was sent?
Not off the top of my head. I know it's posted on the website.
Okay.
I would have to go back and look.
But what I want to clarify was, Dominic, have you developed this plan that we all voted on 7-0 to approve? All those questions and issues that was in that letter were addressed prior to us voting. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, on the phone, Sharon?
Hello everyone, I'm Jareen from UC Cooperative Extension and I work with small scale farmers on Sigma. Dominic, it was a great presentation. It shows a lot of work, but I'm trying to connect some dots here. Please help me connect that dots. So on slide and 10 and 11, I heard you mentioned ag demand reduction, surface water supply reduction, and then reduced groundwater pumping. On the other hand, on slide 33, we see more groundwater pumping and less applied water and same ET. So could you please explain like if the surface water supply is reduced, groundwater pumping is reduced, how come the ET is the same? And is it like related to irrigation efficiency? Like, can you help me understand this concept, please?
Sure. So, sorry, can you mentioned one other slide in addition to slide 10? You
Slide 10, 11, and slide 33.
33. Okay. Let me take those one at a time, and feel free to interrupt me if I'm not quite answering your questions because there's a little bit there. So what we can see in slide 10, at least, right, is a comparison of what we had in the 2025 annual report as well as kind of the pre-refined model. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see is the latest data set. And so you can see a couple different things here. So one, in the agricultural demand side, you can see that the demand in general is either fairly consistent or it has gone down a little bit. And that's going to be from an irrigation efficiency perspective, particularly in some of these some of the middle years of the simulation period. That's when you'll notice some of the greatest reductions here. Now, since 2014, we also see a slight reduction in surface water supply that correlates with the latest data set from Cal Waters, principally targeting the riparian water users.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so sorry, then your follow-up question was slide, oh, sorry, well, and then I guess before I get to the 30s, slide 11 here, right? So where we went from the previous slide looking at demand and then how that demand is met with a combination of surface and groundwater supply. Slide 11 shows groundwater supply as it relates to percolation and canal and reservoir recharge, right? Kind of like the net value of our operations as the groundwater system sees it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you can kind of see here is that in general, again, particularly in those middle years, specifically before the Cal Waters data is available, you see a pretty significant reduction in groundwater use because the surface water supply hasn't been touched yet. Once we get beyond that 2014 mark, as we are impacted by a surface water supply change, that riparian change in the model, as well as the irrigation efficiency, we see a couple different things, right? On one hand, irrigation efficiency says, normally we would see less pumping and less deep percolation, but we're seeing that less pumping being offset by reduced surface water supply, and a reduced surface water supply infers more pumping in order to meet the same demand. So the pumping we see is kind of offset. It's not perfect, it's not one-to-one, but it is fairly similar. And so what we see is a kind of a fairly consistent level of pumping, but we see reduction in our deep percolation, right? And that the reduction in deep percolation is almost entirely driven by a change in irrigation efficiency, an improvement in irrigation efficiency.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then, sorry, do you mind saying one more time, 32 you said? Or
33,
no?
yeah.
33.
So how come less applied water comes with same ET? Shouldn't it decrease, like the consumptive water use?
Sorry, so we have, sorry, so the middle one's the irrigation efficiency. So yeah, so one of the ways that kind of the model estimates a combination of consumptive use and the balance of surface and groundwater supply, is that with an increase in irrigation efficiency, right, like our applied water is reduced, but the consumptive use stays the same, right? Crops don't change a significant amount in their consumptive use, in their transpiration, whether or not they're irrigated with a 50% efficiency or a 70% or 80% efficiency. They're fairly consistent overall, right? The crop and the yields need what they do. So the overall ET is fairly is static, whereas the applied water can go down, and that feeds back into the efficiency.
But if applied water is reduced, it should reduce, right? I mean, I know like crops can get stressed too, and then when they don't have enough water, right? That's the scientific concept. Then how come ET remains the same when the applied water is less? That's
Right.
where I'm missing the point.
Sure. So normally that ties into the irrigation efficiency. So normally, let's say a crop can potentially transpire, let's say for an orchard will be, let's say 40 inches or 42 inches. Usually over the course of that's the potential evapotranspiration over the course of the year. Right now, usually what you have to do is you have to provide additional water to account for a variety of things in your agricultural operations, the uniformity of irrigation, the percolation, right? And so usually we apply water in excess of the evapotranspiration. And so what this is doing by increasing irrigation efficiency is you're not stressing the crop, you're just not providing as much over, right? So if let's say 42 inches is the potential evapotranspiration during the growing season, let's say it's 30 or 36. Let's say it's 36 in this example. If it's 36 inches and we apply 40, now we're changing, we're not going beyond 36, but we're applying water at 38 instead of 40, right? So we're reducing the overall demand, but since we're still above the potential evapotranspiration, we're not stressing the crops and the consumptive use hasn't changed.
Okay, and what is the source of this irrigation efficiency data, and what is the sampling size?
So the data for the irrigation efficiency comes from the agricultural water management plans provided by Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District. And so for each of those plans are provided every 5 years. And so we have 2015, 2020, and 2025 water budgets that the two irrigation districts provide. And our goal is to reflect those operational conditions.
Okay, and I have one last question. I heard you mentioning OpenET and the comparison with that with the data set. So I would like to know, did you see any difference? Like, what is the difference you observed between your model and the OpenET data? And is there any way in the future we can see those like plots or differences that you are observing when you are comparing against OpenET data?
Sure. So for at least for agricultural lands, particularly for irrigated parcels, we see a very close correlation, at least on a long-term scale, an average scale. We do see some variance from year to year, but I would say in kind of a long-term scale, we're generally from year to year within a few percent. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but it is like in the 1, 2, sometimes 3% range at most.
Okay. And also, is there any particular reason to select OpenET? Because I heard in different meetings on OpenET about like overestimating the consumptive use. So that's why I wanted to know, why would you select OpenET?
Right. So the model is not calibrated to OpenET. I just want to make sure we're first clear on that. The reason why we're providing OpenET in this presentation is I wanted to do a kind of even a qualitative relationship between the land use growth that we're seeing and and what the model is presenting, right? And so let me kind of go back to that real quick. Right. And this is why I kind of draw this big arrow right across it. It's not necessarily, I'm not worried about the specific, exact level of accuracy of OpenET, whether or not, and the idea behind this is to have a second data set to ensure that the land use growth and the applied water demand, the consumptive use, right? Like that that the two data sets, or basically we use OpenET to give us a second validation point against the increase in land use, right? So for example, similarly to the gentleman that brought up that earlier that said, hey, in reality, I think I've seen, farms and orchards being pulled out of production. is, we want to make sure that we don't just rely entirely on one data set. We know that any data set is going to have, potential uncertainties with it. And so that's why we leverage two or more data sets that tell very similar stories, right? So we're not calibrating the model to any specific remote sensing data set. Is that I'm using this to evaluate that, hey, A, we've seen land use increase over the past 10 years. And then B, well, in this case, we can see that remote sensing data says that land use and the consumptive use of that land use has also increased over the past 10 years. And so it's really just a correlation to each other rather than a direct representation of what OpenET says.
Okay, thank you very much, Dominic.
Anyone else on the phone? Anyone else in the room? Member agencies? All right, thanks, Dominic.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, moving on to item number 5, Stanislaus County update on board-directed third-party review of existing studies and action plan development in the non-district east. This is going to be led by Christy.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to provide an update. And thank you to Wrangler for your timely questions. I just I'm here to tell you that on June 3rd, the Department of Environmental Resources selected a proposal for the third-party consultant to review the groundwater use management program and the EKI technical report funded by landowners and to develop the non-district east action plan. 4 proposals were submitted, and the proposal selected was from Geosyntec Consultants Incorporated out of Walnut Creek, California. The 3 other proposals submitted were provided by Zanhero LLC, Larry Walker and Associates, and Tri-Hydro Corporation. The department is currently conducting internal discussions regarding the contract details with Geosyntec Consultants, Inc., and cannot provide further information at this time until those details are finalized. Once the department reviews the contract and the review is complete, the department will bring forward a recommendation for Board of Supervisors consideration, which is tentatively anticipated for the July 7th or July 14th Board of Supervisors meeting. The department would also like to thank our non-district East Action Plan Work Group. That work group is comprised of our 2 county board members, Supervisor Withrow and Supervisor B. Condit, county staff, and volunteer landowners from both the non-district East and non-district West management areas. Stacy Call from the City of Riverbank, and other community members. The department intends to schedule the next work group meeting before the end of July to maintain our progress and continue the vital stakeholder engagement. So Wrangler, I just want to say thank you for asking about when we're going to have a meeting for the non-district West. And the department realizes that that's important and a priority. Of course, we're focusing on refining the details of this contract and getting our consultant on board to do the work in the non-district East, which is a priority. We definitely will facilitate work group meetings for the non-district West and definitely invite some of our partner agencies to attend in the future. And in the meantime, I'm really interested to hear some of the topics that you would like brought to the table when we do set up that meeting. So we haven't forgotten. We will work on that in the future when we're able to. You're welcome. And then I also wanted to provide some clarification in context to the second consultant that we're bringing on board recently to help with our GSP implementation activities. A few months ago, I'm sure a lot of you realize that the county approved a contract with EKI. That contract was to replace an existing contract that we had with Tri-Hydro Corporation, who had acquired JJ&A from about 2015, I believe, on. And the work that had been done under that contract was primarily for 2 purposes. And the first is for work associated with implementing our county groundwater ordinance. and discretionary well permitting program, and also work associated with development. And now, more refined, we need to focus on being able to implement our GSPs in the 4 subbasins within the Stanislaus County boundaries. So now we're doing the work that we need to do to raise those groundwater levels. So when the county put together that scope of work, our intent was to have that consultant do the work for us to help with our groundwater implementation responsibilities in 3 of our 4 groundwater subbasins. And it's only 3 out of 4 because the Turlock groundwater subbasin has the East Turlock GSA, and they have already funded, developed, and are implementing their demand management program. So now we need to focus on developing these programs in our 3 other subbasins, and we had done a lot of that work for our Delta Mendota subbasin in 2024 when we developed the Northern Delta Mendota Region Pumping Reduction Plan. So now, currently, we're focused on further implementing our work in the other subbasins, but also, of course, in getting this consultant on board for the third-party review, which should be the foundation, the technical foundation for building implementable action plan for our non-district east management area. In addition to, we also will be focusing on building a demand reduction program for our out-of-district landowners, very likely for the Eastern San Joaquin groundwater subbasin next year. So that was our intent. So as things went down the path and we received the direction from our board to obtain a third-party consultant to review the action or the groundwater use management program and the EKI study, EKI, who had now been brought on board as our groundwater project technical consultant, would be eligible to do that work. So that is why we had to send out this request for the third-party consultant and secure a second contract. So I just want everybody to understand. I know it's really confusing with like all the consultants and all the contracts, but this is where we are today. And we were hoping to have that work covered under our original contract, but just due to the circumstances that we're looking at, we're not able to do that. So once we vet our remaining concerns and details regarding the details of the contract of Geosyntec and prepare to take it to our board for consideration, then we'll be very happy to share all of the rest of the information that you want to know and get those work group meetings scheduled.
Questions, comments from the member agencies?
So EKI is just helping with the implementation side, so the projects that are listed in the GSP.
Oh, great question. That is some of the details that we will be looking forward to discussing later. But when we were, aside from being disqualified from doing supporting the county with this work of developing the action plan and third-party review, that is what we were intending with the original groundwater contract. So for those 3 subbasins where we're still going to be working on meeting our demand reduction targets, now we have to exclude Modesto because EKI has been disqualified, but that's what we were looking at. The GSP implementation support, prioritizing how we're going to build our demand reduction programs, but also how are our projects going to progress and things like that. So that's what we were looking at. But once we hammer out those details and our department is comfortable with approving the contract and taking it to the board, then we'll be able to share additional information publicly. Sure.
Everyone else? Dick? Anyone from the public here in the room first?
Just a quick clarification. I think, Chrissy, that did actually clear up a lot of kind of lingering questions that have been kind of haunting, I think, this room for quite a few meetings. I understand that until things are a little more firm with Geosyntec, that's kind of still up in the air, and I understand and I respect that. Just to be clear, during the Board of Supervisor meetings, it seems like the public didn't really have a whole lot of chance to comment when you guys gave your presentation. When EKI is stepping in, you guys made it seem like they're just kind of taking over from an existing contract. Is there any change or expansion of the scope of work they're going to be providing compared to the last contractor?
There is more detail specifying the support that we need with respect to GSP implementation. Previously, TriHydro had been doing some of that work, and of course, it's all tied to our groundwater project and aligned with our groundwater ordinance and with development of the groundwater sustainability plans. It was just further spelled out because we needed to account for about how much time we would need for key tasks such as like helping with public outreach, technical services needed, and things like that. So more specified.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else here in the room?
Say it, you're trying to not make it confusing. Let me read you something. It comes from the RFP that you guys sent out to the third party consultant. And it says that you're asking for a technical evaluation of the proposed groundwater allocation and demand management framework dated July 28, 2025. I think it's the date the EKI sent the letter. Prepared by EKI, Environmental and Water. These materials reflect differing technical approaches and analysis related to the groundwater allocation methodology and demand management strategies within the management area. The consultant shall evaluate the methodology, the assumption, data input, modeling approaches, and consult conclusions presented in each document to assess technical validity, consistency. Okay, so what that tells me is that the county is asking this consultant to go back after it's already just been confirmed by Dominic that this EKI letter had already been introduced and had been evaluated by the STRGBA board, the GSA members, and a plan had been approved 7-0, including the county voting to approve that plan. And now we have a management plan in place that only needs to be enforced. It doesn't need to be reevaluated by the county. This seems to be absurd. It seems to be another delay tactic. The county has delayed and delayed and delayed. In the meantime, the Stanislaus County taxpayers, ratepayers have paid this bill for their delay tactic. Go back to 2018. Let's take the latest report. Back in 2018, where the county spent $550,000 of our taxpayers' money, showing that the non-district east has done extremely high damage to environment, our aquifer, and was not sustainable. And it's something needed to be done. And they said, we're doing this work on behalf of the GSA. We're not doing the work for them, but we're doing getting going in the right direction. Now the GSA is all completed, the management plan is all in place. Only thing that the county needs to do is have a third party tell them how to enforce the rules that we passed 7-0. Not come back and try to reevaluate what we've already approved. I think that shows very disingenuous tactics on the county board of supervisors, and it shows a repeated effort for delay and waste taxpayers' money, and not take this issue that has cost the taxpayers a lot of money, not take it serious.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, going to the phone here. Jaren, you're up.
Quick question. The meetings that are held for non-district east, are the public meetings or closed doors?
Jaren, they're work group meetings, so they're not public meetings.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else on the phone?
Okay, see no hands raised. Thank you, Christy. We'll move on to item number 6. So this is just the next meeting. Our next regularly scheduled meeting will be July 8th at 1:30. There'll be an option for Zoom, and then also in person here at Oakdale Irrigation District. We're going to be discussing, amongst other things, land subsidence, and also groundwater dependent ecosystems. So tune in for that. Additionally, for the public and for member agencies, we've got a meeting schedule lined up here that we need to stick to make sure that we get to the GSP deadline and get that document out for public review, et cetera. So we'll probably, we're anticipating needing to have 2 meetings in August and 2 meetings in October. I'll send out some just tentative dates for you all. Just keep it on your calendar. And then as we get closer, we'll send it out for public to confirm. But just don't be surprised if you see a couple extra meetings those 2 months coming up. Questions, comments on next meeting? Nope. Questions, comments from the public? Seeing none, hearing none. Committee comments and reports? Anyone from the committee? Comments, reports? All right, we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming, and we hope to see you on the 8th.